All right, fourth grade, today we are starting our winter project. We're going to be creating a birch tree landscape with some masking tape and some watercolor paint today. So this is step one of our project. You are going to receive a large white piece of paper. The very first thing you should do is write your name on the back. On the front of your paper, you are going to decide what kind of ground you want to have for your birch trees. So this is where the snow is going to be. You can just create a wavy line. It can be really wavy or just slightly wavy. We're doing this with a pencil. Next, you're going to use the masking tape at your table, and you're going to be sharing this with your table mates. So what I would suggest is taking off a few long pieces for yourself and then cutting them to the size that you need. And so that way you can share the masking tape without one person using it at a time. So once you have your masking tape and you are ready to tape off your trees, you are going to place long pieces of tape across your paper first. So this is going to be the trunk of the tree. So my tree is sticking into the ground past the pencil line, and it's also going past the top of my paper. So you should have about 4 or 5 trees when you're finished, and they don't have to be going straight up and down. They can be kind of diagonal a little bit. Anywhere on your paper. Okay, so there I've got 4 trees. You should have 4 or 5. Then you're gonna take short little pieces of tape, so any short little length, and you are going to cut it the short way. So this would be the long way. If I were doing that, I would cut like this. We're gonna turn it to the side and cut on the short side. So I'm gonna cut off this first part. It's kind of like a triangle shape, just to kind of make a straight edge for myself. So now I'm going to cut on the short side and cut several small little rectangles. These are going to be our little birch tree branches. So I'm just going to go and stick them on my trees somewhere on the sides like this. And if you want your branches a little bit longer, here I have some leftover tape, so I could turn it the other way and cut the longer way. So there's one tree. You could go all the way down to the ground if you want, or leave some space at the bottom like I did, whatever you like the best. So now I'm gonna work on my next tree. So I have cut a small piece of tape for myself, made sure the edge is straight, and then start cutting and placing some little branches. So once you've got branches on all of your trees, you're gonna take your paper, flip it to the back, and trim off those tape pieces that are sticking off the top. So that way your artwork won't stick to anyone else's when you put it on the drying rack. So before we start painting, you're gonna find a white oil pastel, and you can use this to create some snowflakes in the sky. So this won't show up yet because we have white paper and a white oil pastel. But when we go to add paint, the watercolor will resist the oil pastel and it will leave a white, beautiful snowflake in the background. So I'm just creating some dots in some little star shapes for the snowflakes in the background of my trees. All right, so next is the best part. We are going to use are liquid watercolors. So you're gonna get a tray that looks like this with hot colors and cold colors, and then a little container of salt in the middle. And then you're also going to need a paintbrush. And for this, I like these flat ones that have the red handle. This is gonna make it go easier, but if there are none of these left, then you can also use the green handled. And you need a water bucket with clean water. So to do this, you are gonna choose if you want a hot color background or a cold color background. And depending on which one you want, you're gonna start with a color, and this is liquid watercolor, so the water is already mixed in. And it's really, really vibrant this way because we're not adding water to it, so it will show up beautifully on our paper. So I'm choosing hot colors for mine. So I'm using my paintbrush and I'm just gonna paint right over my trees. And I'm painting first along this pencil line. And you can see my oil pastel in some spots is already showing up. So we're gonna paint stripes of color in the background with either hot colors or cold colors. And when you go to your next color, you can kind of cross them over. So I'm crossing orange over pink. It kind of mixes together in the middle, makes a kind of dark reddish pink. Since we're painting over our tape trees, that is protecting our paper behind. So when this dries and we remove our tape, we will be left with the white trees. So you could do a pattern for this if you want, or you could just kind of alternate your colors, however you want to paint your background. So the last step today, after you have painted your sky, is we're gonna add the salt to our watercolor to create some kind of sparkly texture in the background. So salt will only work on watercolor if your surface is wet. And as I was painting, some of my background dried a little bit too quickly. So I'm gonna grab a spray bottle and I'm gonna spray my watercolors just a few times. So I don't want this to be like completely sopping wet, but I want it to be wet enough that you have some water on the surface. So then you're gonna take your salt, just a little pinch, and sprinkle it onto your watercolors. And you can already see in some spots, the salt is already kind of soaking up the watercolor and it's making that sparkly kind of snow texture. So as it dries, it will kind of continue to absorb the water and leave more of that texture. So when you're finished today, you can put your artwork on the drying rack and clean up your table. All right, fourth grade, today we are finishing your birch tree project. These have dried and we are needing to peel off our tape. So we're gonna start at the bottom of our paper. You always wanna peel your tape from this, the snowy part, instead of the top, because if you peel from the top, it might rip your paper. So I'm gonna start down here. And I am just gonna carefully peel my tape very slowly, just a little bit at a time. And sometimes it might rip like that, but that's okay. So I'm just gonna go back and peel the rest off. And then I am left with negative space where my tape was. So you might notice that my watercolor actually kind of got under my tape a little bit. That's okay, because we're gonna add some black paint and some texture to these trees in a second. So I'm gonna continue peeling my tape off the rest of my trees. So now I am going to use a small piece of cardboard, some black paint, and the square paintbrush again. We're gonna use these things to create the texture on our trees. So for the trunk of the tree, which is the wide vertical part, we're gonna use our cardboard and our paint to create the black and white texture that's usually on a birch tree. So dip your cardboard in the paint, just a little bit, and then tap it off on your plate so you make sure you don't have too much. You kind of just want a like barely there amount. So I'm gonna start at the top of my tree on one of the sides, line it up with the edge, and just gently swipe towards the middle. And see, this is why it didn't matter that I had a little bit of watercolor that kind of got in under my tape, because I'm covering it up with the black paint right now. So I'm just gonna swipe all the way down and then maybe go over it another time to make sure I have enough texture on there. And you can see it leaves that kind of rough birch tree texture that's very classic of birch tree bark. So then I'm gonna do the same thing on the opposite side. So dip your cardboard in the paint, tap it off a little bit, start at the top. This time I'm lining it up with the right edge and just swipe towards the middle. So this is a very irregular process. Some spots have more black paint than others, and that's good. We want this to look very organic and natural. We don't want it to look like a perfect pattern, because then it won't look like nature. So there's one of my trees. So I'm gonna repeat this across my paper on my other 3 trees. So a reason why you want to be careful that you don't have too much paint on here is you could accidentally just paint your whole tree black. So you want to just really make sure you tap it off on your tray. So you should have barely any paint on your cardboard. All right, so my birch trees are finished. Now this cardboard is a little bit too big to do for your branches. So we're gonna use a paintbrush, and we're gonna do something called a dry brush effect. So dry brush is when you have just barely any paint on your paintbrush, so little that it just kind of leaves a dry texture on there. So I've got some black paint on here. I'm gonna really like wipe it off on my plate. So I just have like barely any paint on there. Okay, so then I'm gonna go on the bottom edge of my tree branches and just kind of like do that same swiping texture on one side of my branches. You really just need to do this on the bottom. If you wanted to go on the top, you could as well, but I'm just gonna do the bottom on mine. So since we have barely any paint on our brush, it leaves that brush texture, which is perfect for the birch tree. So if you are ever worried about having too much paint on your brush, you could always test your brush on a piece of free draw paper and make sure that your texture looks like this and not just like a regular swipe of paint. Okay, so the last couple things we're gonna do is paint our shadows under our trees and also add some more snow in the sky. So for the shadows, you're gonna get a watercolor tray, and you can choose light blue or dark blue for this. So, and since I'm using my flat brush for this, I can create a shadow that's nice and straight on the sides, just like a tree. So I'm gonna start at the bottom of the trunk and paint a diagonal or a straight line that is the same width as my tree trunk. So I don't want it to make it too small, so I don't want to make like one stripe down, because that would not make sense since my tree is about 2 paintbrushes wide. So this could be done with dark blue or light blue, it is your choice. And they can go slightly diagonally, they can go all the same direction, they can go some different directions. You get to decide. Then the last thing we're gonna do is add some more snow in the sky. So I'm gonna use the back of my paintbrush for this, the plastic part, dip it in the white paint, and then start making some dots of snow in my background. And this just really makes the snow pop because sometimes the oil pastel doesn't show up quite as well. So the oil pastel is kind of like the snow in the background, and then the paint snow is closer to us. It's more visible. All right, guys, so there is our finished winter landscape. We created lots of texture in this on our birch trees in the background with the salt that we added. We also created a warm or cool background. We used our shadows, and we used negative space with the tape when we put our masking tape on. So this was a really fun project, and I hope you guys had fun. All right, so when you're finished with your project today, you can put it on the drying rack and clean up your area.